What an absolute joy to be providing you with this session on your well-being. I have worked for over 2 decades now in schools, and nobody quite understands the depth and magnitude of what you do each day for your students, for your colleagues, and for the families with whom you work. I get it. There's very, very little time for you to focus on your well-being because you invest so much in the well-being of your students and the families. So it is such a pleasure to be here for you and provide you with some practical ways you can support your well-being based on my Educator Wellbeing book, and hopefully we can delve a little bit further as well and look into some other ways to look after you first, and the ripple of that effect of that is going to be just fantastic for everyone in your school community. So when we look at wellbeing, really, many people talk about burnout as civilization disease. So it's something that's really quite new. We are so incredibly busy. You know, I remember over 20 years ago, when I was working at Autism SA, my very, very first job. And if I had a message from somebody, if someone needed to get in touch with me, some lovely person would answer the phone and the person would ask, I'd like to speak with Madhavi, and they would say, oh, look, Madhavi's actually not in the office at the moment. May I take a message? And then this message would be taken on a piece of paper, and that piece of paper will be taken down to my office and popped into the in tray, right? That is how long ago it was. So we're talking the 90s here. Now, what this meant was, if I wasn't in the office, I didn't know it existed. So when I came into the office in my own time, I would then go through everything in my in tray. And I would attend to everything as quickly as I could. And then, it is this long ago, I would then take it across to a spike that was also on my desk. Those of you who are in my era, I'm 47, so in that era will remember this. You'd spike it in as a done, and that would be it. You'd completed your task. Now when I look at our roles, on our mobile phones, on our laptops, we have email, we have social media, we have messages coming in all directions at us. So we are always available. And at a glance, even if you're not intending to check your email, just at a glance, you might just grab your phone or just pick up your laptop to do something else, and boom, you're aware of all of the expectations and demands that you genuinely care about and want to support and want to assist with, but it's there and it's in your mind. So whether you can address it or support it and deal with it in that moment is one thing. But it's there in your mind. And then what happens from this is you carry this enormous mental load. When you chose education as a career, you didn't choose it because it was, this will be really easy because I'm going to get all of this leave. Awesome, I'll take that. You need that leave and then double that leave, right? You chose it because inherently in you had strengths and abilities that were unique to this field, that had the infinite capacity to make a difference for this next generation. Whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about social skills, really, your education, your counselling, bit of a friend and a mentor, so many roles, right, that you carry. And you do it with so much care and compassion in your heart. So what this means for your well-being is this mental load you carry is not just about what happens when your students are there between 8:45 and 3:15 or whatever those hours are. You have this carried through your mind and in your heart from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. And this is the nature of what we do. Caring, teaching, leading the next generation is an enormous privilege. I love what I do, as I'm sure you do. The reality is we have to learn the methods to switch off, because we don't have that same distance, that same little break that we used to have in the 90s and a little bit into the 2000s, where you could actually leave it behind. But with email, with mobile devices, it's with us all the time. So if a parent is worried about their child, this is your student. You care. You want them to be okay. So even if you just see it, it's there. And then what this will do is have a significant impact on your well-being. So this whole civilization disease, this burnout we see, when I was writing this book, we looked at what the literature was saying. And the literature said when we look globally at well-being in education, it's probably one of the lowest rates of well-being, in fact, not probably, it is, of all professions. And yet, the thing I found really interesting was that job satisfaction in education was on the higher end for professions. So we really love what we do. We know it matters. We know we have impact. We know that we're making a difference, not just for the child in front of us, but for all the people with whom they continue to interact with. That is the beauty of our job, right? We don't just do this 1 year and then that's it, off you go. We plant seeds, and sometimes it might be us that benefits from those seeds, all that hard work on social skills training and literacy and numeracy and all of the things that you teach. We might see that benefit, or it might be the teacher 5 years from now that gets that benefit, but we're planting those seeds. And when the child's mind is ready, when the child has the right environment, those skills, those support systems will grow from there. So that's where we get our job satisfaction from. We know we make a difference, but it's time for us to actually reset the education system and put educator wellbeing as a priority. So everyone working in schools, from the person that greets everyone at the door to the person who puts the Band-Aid on, from the child who's really fussed and upset about hurting themselves, to the staff, to the SSOs, to the teachers, to the leadership team. So we want everyone to look after themselves, and we'll explore why in some more detail in a moment. So we know we catch it from work, and how we cure it is we take responsibility for our well-being. No one is going to do wellbeing for us. No one can do wellbeing for us. We've all got a broad range of complex circumstances that we juggle. We don't carry just our role in education. Many of us have so many other people we care for and support, and other things that we juggle in our lives. So how we cure this civilization disease is by paying focused attention on well-being. And it is just as important as brushing our teeth. It is just as important as taking a shower every day. This is a form of hygiene, and it's time that we look at well-being. So let's start with our gorgeous brains, because we have to understand how our brains work for us to really fully understand how we're going to make this change happen. There's no point in me giving you a bunch of tools and going, okay, here you go, off you go, and good luck with that. It's not going to work. It's not sustainable. You need to understand the full complexity of what you're about to take on, but then hopefully see through practical application every day of your wellbeing tools that you can really make a difference for this. So when we look at our brains, we've got 86 billion neurons, right? And when we look at each of those 86 billion neurons, each of them have 2,000 to 3,000 synaptic connections in them. So what this means is it's a really complex thing, right? And so if we want to change a behaviour, which is learning well-being, learning to put ourselves first, learning to look after ourselves. If we're going to start that as a new behaviour, we need to actually activate a neural network in our brain and then repeatedly do that thing again and again and again until we have those beautiful synaptic connections and our brain can actually create new neurological pathways for well-being. So we can't just have an intention of, I'm going to look after myself. That's it. I'm burning out. I'm looking after myself. We've all had that thought in our head. And then we can't just go, all right, I took a walk today. Great, I did something for myself. Or I took a day off, or I exercised, or I watched something really funny on Netflix. We can't do these in these little isolated bursts. They're nice, so grab what you can by all means. But if we really want to change our mental health and well-being and really create a brain that is in a state of wellness that can thrive and grow and just be a really great brain to have, which will lead to such joyful emotional states, if that's what we want, we have to engage in it every single day, and we have to do it right. Otherwise, we will not see those changes. So keep this in mind. It is a daily thing. Like I said, just like brushing your teeth, just like taking a shower, these are things that we really, really need to put our attention on and then practice again and again. So let's continue on. Here's the challenge we have, right? And I wish I had a much prettier brain slide for you, but it just so happened it dropped off and it disappeared. So I've just got a really basic slide here for you, but you know how it all works. So we know that the first place, you know, when something stressful happens, and when you're working in education, there's a few stressful things that happen each day, right? Because you basically spend your whole day around young, underdeveloped minds. There are very few jobs like that, but not just one or two or five. Like there's 20 or 30 of them, and bless them, they're fantastic. But the reality is, until, you know, particularly until you're 8, but then really into your 20s, the brain is still grossly underdeveloped in children. And so what this means for you, let's just look in that first 8 years of working with a child, the first 8 years of their life. What this means is the most predominant part of the brain to operate is the feeling part. So little people under 8 kind of aren't particularly resilient and socially, emotionally confident, are they? They're kind of still figuring all of this out. And so that means you ask them to transition from one activity to another. You say the word no, which none of us really like to hear, let's face it. But no is like, oh, I can't do that really fun thing when you're a child. So any challenge to the brain in those early years leads to a very quick emotional response, doesn't it? And so what happens is straight away, the problem is received in the brainstem, which is our primal part of the brain. And so that part of the brain goes, oh my gosh, there's a problem. Now, you and I know it's not a big problem. You just have to stop doing that activity and start doing the next one. But when you're a child and you have to stop something you love doing for something you don't love doing, that often leads to an emotional response. So in those first 8 years, what you spend a lot of your work time doing is co-regulating someone else's emotions. And that is so emotionally taxing, right? And so this has a big impact on our well-being if we don't have the methods to let that stress out. So in the downstairs brain, where all the reactivity and all the emotions happening, you've got a child in front of you, but of course, because of our beautiful mirror neurons, which you all know very well about, what happens is you reflect whatever's happening in front of you. So if a kid is absolutely cracking it and they're really, really upset and really worked up, we feel what's happening in front of us. We can't help it. That's how we are wired as a species. It's actually a really good thing because it's often where our empathy and our interconnection with others happens. So it's a bit like I often refer to, you know, funniest home videos. You're watching it, you know, everything's going along, you can feel the tension building up, something's about to happen, and then in that moment that thing happens, you just go, oh, and you can't look. That's your mirror neurons feeling what's happening in front of you, even though you're just looking at it through the television. So what I want you to remember about this, why this is important for your well-being, is you need to create a buffer. You need to know, okay, I'm around emotional people. And don't worry, if your students are above 8, you're still dealing with this. I'm just saying in the first 8 years, it's particularly bad. It starts to get much, much better after that. But until you're in your mid-20s, so way past the years that, that you're spending with them, the brain really struggles with this. So just remember, in those moments when you have an emotional person in front of you, the contagion of emotion is real. So with the contagion of emotion, we need to make sure in that moment that we create a buffer between us and what's going on in front of us to centre ourselves first. If we can't calm ourselves down in that moment, we will also stay in the downstairs brain. We won't make it up to rational thinking. We'll be in that emergency mode, which is not good for our brain. And if you think about those beautiful 86 billion neurons, if you're spending a lot of time in your downstairs brain, reacting to what's happening in front of you, feeling overwhelmed and stressed by it, you're creating neurological pathways in your brain for stress. So it's really important to keep that in mind. In that moment, that is the moment, and I know it feels like an emergency because I've been right there, I've been teaching social skills for over 20 years, and I sit there with those sweet little souls and they're just completely losing the plot in front of me, and I'm thinking, I've got to teach this lesson, I've got to get through this lesson, I had a lesson planned, and I'm going through all of this in my mind, right? But the reality in that moment is if I'm not calm, I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to pass the fact that I'm not calm on to my student. So they're going to catch, because of the contagion of emotion, my dysregulation and stress, but also I'm going to be paving the pathways in my mind, my brain, to be a more stressed person. So this is truly how we make a change to our well-being, is by spending more time in the upstairs brain. How do we get there? By calming ourselves down, and these methods will unfold to you as we go along.